welcome back to the HBO Max movie hour. I'm Tyler.
I'm Daniel.
And today we're going to be talking about The Little Things. The Little Things is a 2021 film directed and written by John Lee Hancock. It stars two-time Academy Award winner Denzel Washington, Academy Award winner Rami Malek, and Academy Award winner Jared Leto. I think it's a very fitting film to be released on HBO Max. It doesn't feel like it needs really a theatrical release. It's a nice little drama, crime thriller, and you don't really need to see it on the big screen. But do you have to see it at all? Daniel, tell me what you think.
No, I don't think that it's required viewing for any reason. It's not a very original film. It's not... It really just doesn't give you very much. We've been texting about this, our responses to Lockdown versus to this, and in some ways, this is a better movie than Lockdown, but in other ways, it isn't, which is really sad because, like you said, Denzel Washington is in this movie. Rami Malek is in this movie. Jared Leto is in this movie. And John Lee Hancock is a really talented writer and director. So this movie should work, but it doesn't. And we'll talk about why it doesn't. It's not something that I will ever revisit in my life, except for to do this podcast.
I agree with your sentiments wholeheartedly. Very disappointing. With Lockdown, again, I guess we're just kind of comparing it to our first movie review here, but in comparison to Lockdown, I feel like Lockdown is a little more endearing than this movie because, it was made during a pandemic. People were like dying all around. They still are, and it's horrible, but they managed to make a product out of it. But this was made before. It has been a long time coming too. John Lee Hancock wrote this movie like in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I assume before 7 came out, because if he wrote it after 7 came out, it's very similar to 7, except without the main thing that makes 7 exciting, which are the twists, the turns, and the 7 deadly sins in it. But yeah, overall, I just felt like this movie was severely missing something. And when you have 4 Academy Awards amongst the 3 leading actors, and I'm still saying you're kind of missing something, it's sad. It's really sad because, again, everyone does a fine job, but no one gives their best performance, and certainly no one gives their worst performance. Jared Leto. He doesn't. He's really good in this movie. And again, we'll talk about, I think, Jared Leto in general, but let's just open this up to just critiquing the film on its own merits. I felt like the screenplay itself was a little dull, a little boring. Like you have like the classic hotshot young detective played by Rami Malek, and you have the classic old school, like seen some shit detective played by Denzel Washington. And again, we talked about this off mic, but I feel like Rami Malek was really like miscast in this. Like he's supposed to be... what's like a good comparison? I'm thinking like even like a young Kurt Russell, like a young cowboy type of detective is what's needed for this role. And to see his transition into something a lot darker would be really interesting. But like Rami Malek has such a, for lack of a better term, weird looking face and like eyes that like have seen, like I'm pretty sure Rami Malek has lived in the 1700s because his eyes just look like they're so old. You know what I mean? Yeah. It doesn't really fit with the hotshot detective. Like he's giving a speech at the beginning of this and he's like, we're going to catch the guy who does this. And like, it should be like that. It's like, we're going to catch this guy and we'll bring him to justice. But instead it's like, we're going to catch this guy and we're going to bring him to justice. And it's like, oh, it just doesn't fit 100%. And I think that's one of my main critiques about this film is just Rami Malek's character, who is named Jim Baxter, which is a great name for a cop. But that kind of like turned me off to the overall like start of the movie. I was just like, oh, I'm not really buying Rami Malek, which is sad because he's one of my favorite actors. I mean, I've watched a good amount of Mr. Robot. I loved him in Night at the Museum, and it's just kind of a bummer that he doesn't hit it out of the park here. But
Yeah, and I mean, this is a pro Rami Malek podcast, and he is an incredibly talented actor. We both agree. We both love him. We both love the stuff that he's in. This is not his fault. It is a miscasting. I do think that the performance gets a lot better in the last 45 minutes. We'll get there in a minute. But to start with, the introduction to his character is very cliche. Talking about the issues with the script and how dull it is and how familiar it is and how sort of formulaic it is. He's introduced when Denzel Washington parks in front of his car, and he's like leaning back with sunglasses, and he's like, "You parked in front of my car. I don't have time to wait for you, buddy." And he's like, "Oh, okay, this is." But yeah, no, he's introduced as this guy who he just is not. So there's on one hand, the character is so cliched and so silly. It's almost straight out of like a 1950s flick. He's like this old hotshot Hollywood detective, and he's on the up and coming. He's like Rich Evans from Red Letter Media, and he doesn't quite fit that, like you said. And since the character is sort of tired, it's this combination that's really tough to watch. On top of that, by the way he's introduced, that he and Denzel are going to be at odds at first, and then they're going to come together, and they're still not going to like each other that much, but eventually they'll come together on a mutual respect because they're going after... It's seven. And we'll talk about how this movie would be better if it had the cast of seven.
I said this in my Letterboxd review. It's like the vague summary of Seven.
Right.
Like someone's drunk at a party and it's like, let me tell you about this movie Seven, and they forget all the cool parts of it and only tell you the basic story.
Yeah, and so with Rami, it is disappointing because his performance is underwhelming for the majority of the film. Now, I do want to say, from here on out, we're going spoiler territory. I don't think you're going to be missing too much. It is pretty widely available. It's on a streaming service, so I don't feel too bad about spoiling the movie. For me, when his performance gets really good, and I guess we'll just jump back and forth in time. I guess we could just go kind of character by character and then pick it from there, I guess.
Definitely. I mean, I think this is a film that deserves that because you have such prolifically great actors in it.
And that's what sells the movie. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that the Rami Malek performance is, for the first... I think the movie is about 2 hours and 7 minutes. So for the first hour and 20-ish, Rami is playing a character. He's playing an archetype. And the way that character and that archetype is written is as cool guy. So he is playing cool guy. And that's not how you want to act. That's not how you want to perform. That's not how you want your character to move through the world. He sort of is like playing a cardboard cutout of a hotshot detective. When that switches up is in one of my favorite parts of the movie, actually. It's the stakeout scene where he and Denzel are just in the car sitting outside of Jared Leto's apartment, and they're just waiting all day long. And they're waiting and they're waiting and they're waiting. And eventually Jared Leto just goes back into his apartment at night, closes the door. Rami punches the window and just screams, "Fuck." It was the first time that he was reacting to something. And that's really good acting, is reaction. That's good character, is reaction. And that point forward is when his character starts reacting to things and starts making decisions. And that's when his performance gets 10 times better because he has more to work with. He's not just playing a cardboard cutout of a character. He's actually playing action because action is character. And so that's when it kind of gets good. Those last like 45 minutes or so, when things are actually happening, I think the movie's kind of a little bit fun at that point.
Like you were saying, he starts making some rash decisions that are exciting. You know, he decides to go with Jared Leto into the desert. He decides to try to find these girls. And like, again, it's something in the beginning where it's like, it feels so cliched that like, you kind of don't buy that he cares about these girls. It's like, you think he just cares about them because he should,
right.
If that makes sense. But again, like you were saying, like it gets really interesting at the end with Rami. And I think the last like 10 to 20 minutes are like some really interesting stuff that in a movie that doesn't set itself up like a thriller, I think it would be really like a thriller mystery. I think it would be really interesting. But unfortunately, like this whole movie is set up as a psychological thriller, and the psychological thrill at the end doesn't really impress that much because, I mean, for me personally, I watched Prisoners and Chinatown this week. So for me, it was like a little less surprising than those movies. And again, I think when we talk about a movie, it's really important that, like, you know, like, we're aspiring filmmakers, but like, we're also watching a bunch of different movies at the same time. So like, sometimes an okay movie might get a little worse because we're watching a bunch of classic movies that we need to catch up on. And for me, that personally happened with this. But yeah, anything else on Rami Malek in this film, or just like his character in general?
I think that the seeds are there. I think he did a great job of explaining that this is like Seven if somebody was drunk at a party explaining it. I think that's brilliant because the seeds are all there, but the execution just isn't. His character is, he and Denzel are supposed to be mirroring each other. He's basically just young Denzel. We learn that Denzel's character went through a divorce, had this heart attack. He drove himself crazy on an old case. And you're starting to see that happen with the Rami Malek character. So that in and of it's, and you're seeing his marital problems at home. He's, you know, things aren't going great there. But it's just kind of underbaked. It's not even half baked. It's like quarter baked. It's a runny cupcake. And it's not particularly appetizing. Every time we cut back to his wife and his children, I'm thinking like, I just want to get out of here. Like, they're not giving me enough reason to care here. Just because you put woman and child into a movie doesn't mean I'm going to care about woman and child. And this guy, it's the same. It's also similar with Denzel's character. They don't really give us much reason to love these characters, especially because they're not doing a lot for the first hour.
Yeah, especially if they're not Rami and Denzel in this movie. Like, you're not going to care, really. Like, I found myself caring a little more about Denzel because I'm like, oh, this is a character in a different Denzel movie that I love, you know?
Yeah.
But like you were saying, you really hit the nail on the head with just adding family doesn't necessarily mean I care 100%. And I feel like something like that happened in like the Comey Rule. I don't know if you ever saw that that miniseries. But like with James Comey, they kept cutting back to his family and being like, look, he has a child, like, yeah. Care. And it's just kind of like, show me why, like, give me some unique thing about the relationship. And one thing Bohemian Rhapsody did pretty well, I think, was not editing, but but it was the relationship between Rami Malek and Lucy Boynton. It just felt kind of like natural, and like they had some again, I haven't seen this since fucking 2018, but they had some nice little things that added to the film, and I just didn't feel that with Rami's character really. Yeah,
I mean, just generally, it's kind of a cold movie, not just because it's about a serial killer, but because there's like no connection between any of the characters whatsoever, and they could use that, they could explore that, but they don't. It just is sort of a byproduct of sort of a lack of heart in the movie.
Right. And in a weird way, the direction there is kind of good if they're going for that. It did feel kind of dry and like you needed water, you know. Denzel lives out on this like ranch type thing in the middle of the desert. The third act takes place in a desert. It's very dry. It's very cold. Also, the opening sequence was really interesting, actually. I really like that. I mean, a big fear of mine just in life in general is heights, but also just like driving in the middle of nowhere and someone just like is like being weird, you know?
It reminded me of two things. One, I thought, I totally agree. I think the opening scene is actually pretty fun. And it's a nice little subversion that the girl actually gets away. She's not hacked up in the middle of the desert. So from the top, I thought, okay, we're in for something fun here, and then unfortunately it goes downhill. But what I do, two comps to that scene, is it reminded me a lot of Nocturnal Animals. There's a very similar scene in Nocturnal Animals where Aaron Taylor Johnson's character is driving on a road and just terrorizing this family in a car. And it also felt like it could have been a scene from Zodiac, like David Fincher's Zodiac. Totally. It was good serial killer material. And just so everyone knows at home, the serial killer genre is probably my favorite genre of film. It's the thing that like I love more than anything. If I could make any movie in the world, it would be about a serial killer, probably. Love it to death. And that's why also I'm so disappointed in this movie.
Yeah. Also, something this movie does similar to Zodiac is like you don't really know who the killer is, which is always a lot of fun. But I knew it was gonna happen at the literally at the beginning of the movie. I'm like, oh, we're not gonna know who this serial killer. Like, I don't know why. I just felt like because the only other actor in this movie besides the cops are Jared Leto, and it's like they wouldn't give that away in the trailer, which I actually didn't watch, but like I knew Jared Leto was in it. Yeah, I suppose we can move a little forward to. You want to tackle Leto or Denzel first?
Yeah, let's save Sir Denzel for last, and let's jump into Leto.
Yeah, let's jump into Leto. I feel like nowadays you can't really talk about Jared Leto without talking about how crazy of an actor and a person he is.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll try to refrain from it and just talk about his performance. But obviously we can get into him as a character. But yeah, I'll let you start, Dan.
So it should be noted that the Golden Globe nominations came out today, the day that we are recording this, or yesterday maybe. I don't know why I corrected myself. Doesn't matter. Nobody would care. But the Golden Globe nominations just came out, and Jared Leto got nominated for this performance. I don't think it's necessarily a bad performance. I think he's actually doing a lot of good stuff in the movie. I think the character itself is a little bit overwritten. It's a little bit quippy. It's a little bit clever. It's a little bit, a bit too subversive of like, ooh, I'm the serial killer in a movie kind of a guy. But I think he does some good things in this movie, performance-wise. He's continuing to not blink, which he started in, well, I mean, when did he start that? I guess he does it a little bit in Suicide Squad. He definitely does it in Blade Runner 2049. And he does it in this movie. He decides, I'm not going to blink because it's going to make me look creepier. And that's true. It does. He looks very creepy. His eyes are sunken. He doesn't blink. His hair is oily. He's kind of got like a pot belly and a limp. And, you know, just like kind of pulpy character choices that are kind of, you know, in most movies you would say, okay, this is definitely overacting. But because there's so little to latch onto in this movie, I found myself kind of enjoying that more than a lot of other things, just because it was the only like cup of water in the desert. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's a great performance, but I think he was handicapped by the writing a little bit. So I think with what he had, he did a pretty fun job.
Yeah, it's overall a solid performance, but I feel like I always use this word because I love it so. But I feel like it's a good microcosm of his career in some ways. Like, Jared Leto has been in a lot of movies, a lot of great movies, but aside from Dallas Buyers Club, I don't feel like there's really a performance that super sticks out. Like, that is like fantastic, like it's the creepiest role you've ever seen in your life. You know, I feel like this is kind of his third attempt of being like super creepy. You got 2016 Suicide Squad, and then you got Blade Runner in 2017, and then you got this movie this year. And like, I think he's really great in all of those. Like, in some sort of ways, he's doing something really different, but like it doesn't like hit fully. And I feel like that this movie is a perfect example of that. It just doesn't hit fully. And I know he puts a lot of work into everything he does, clearly. And I'm sure, like, he's like 50 now, which is insane or something. He's like
beautiful man. Yeah,
he looks incredible. And I know there will be a performance out there for him, but like similar to this, it's just like I've seen Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter. You know, it's like it's not the greatest like serial killer-ish maybe performance of all time, and like I want that for him personally. Like I think he really has the capacity to do it, but overall, like it feels like half-baked, like the whole movie, but like the performance itself, like you were saying, is like a little overwritten too. He's too like, am I the killer or am I not? You know, it's not a nice, like, really hinted at balance. It's just more like it feels just like really just kind of unbalanced there.
And I do think the fact that his being the serial killer is sort of ambiguous, I think that is sort of a saving grace of the performance also, because if you accept that he's not the killer, then the performance is actually kind of even better, because it's like, oh, this guy's just a weirdo trying to play a killer. Like so you can kind of talk yourself more and more into the performance if you do believe that he was not the killer. And I think the movie kind of, even though it is ambiguous, I think it sort of more so leans to the fact that he probably was not the killer. But again, it ends ambiguously, so it's open to interpretation.
He also has that weird taco line. I wrote it in my notes. He's like, we can drive all the way home and stop for tacos or something like that. And it's so weird. But yeah, and also kind of on this like unbalanced part that we're talking about with Jared Leto, I felt the editing was a little choppy.
Very choppy.
Yeah, like I don't normally notice editing, but like maybe it's because I've been editing more of these and stuff. But like, yeah, it just didn't flow that well sometimes. And again, editing is the best when you don't notice it at all. And I unfortunately noticed it a bit, and I was like, oh, this is jumping around all over the place, you know. And I put it in my notes, but
yeah, you mentioned Bohemian Rhapsody earlier, which is like famously a film, like one of the great awful Oscar winners. It wins for best editing, and it's so choppy, and there's a cut every 2 seconds. It's really a mumbled mess. But I think the one thing you can say in defense of the movie is that the movie was a mess of a production. And so the award is almost like, hey, good job, you saved the movie just by doing anything, just by putting glue and paper together. And I kind of feel the same way about this one. I think that there's a couple of scenes, one scene in particular where Denzel is getting into his car. I think it's in the beginning when he's leaving his place to go into LA for the first time. He just gets into his car, and that should be one shot, maybe 2 shots. But it's like 5 shots, and they're all super choppy. And you just get the sense that like when they filmed it, maybe Denzel made an acting choice in one that he didn't maintain continuity with for the other shots. So you have to cut around that. Maybe one of the shots was out of focus. Like there's just a number of reasons why you couldn't play it out in 1 or 2 shots. And that's kind of why it ends up so choppy. Another scene like that, he's walking into some building. He goes up the stairs and then into like a side door that's up the stairs. And
right, yeah.
It's like wide shot, cut to medium, then there's like a close up, and then they cut back to the wide shot. And then you kind of wonder, one, did we need that many shots to show a simple action of him going into a door? The answer is no, you don't need that many shots. 2, since the wide shot starts it and ends it, why couldn't we just stay in the wide for the whole time? I don't know what the reason is for the choppy editing, but there's definitely something going on there, because it is consistent throughout the film, and it makes you wonder about the confidence of storytelling and camera choice from John Lee Hancock and the rest of the team. It's very noticeable. It's very noticeable. Definitely.
And also, I meant to say this earlier, but John Lee Hancock directed one of my like favorite recent live action Disney movies, Saving Mr. Banks. We are huge Colin Farrell fans here.
Yeah, big time.
And we'll talk about him, I'm sure, one day. But yeah, he like knows how to make a competent movie, and he's done it plenty of times. And I would say this is made competently, but again, it feels like it's just missing that extra mile. Like that's the main criticism I think we have about this movie. It's like, it's great, it's like solid, but like it just needed a little more push in every regard.
Yeah, with that, let me just jump in on this kind of comp. It doesn't totally work as a comp, but the movie Inside Man, the Spike Lee movie, it's a bank robbery movie. It's a heist movie, and it's kind of conventional. Denzel also is in it. So that's fun. And Chiwetel Ejiofor from Lockdown. So we got 2 for 2 right there. But the movie's kind of conventional. It wasn't going to be a Spike Lee movie. It was going to be somebody else's. It kind of went into development hell, and then it fell into Spike's lap, and Spike put all of his iconic cast of character actors into the movie and added a few little Spike Lee visual flourishes that just made it his own thing. And what it ends up becoming is like such a fun bank heist movie. It's like a ton of fun. It's not super original, but you leave the movie being like, that was good. That was fun. This movie doesn't have any of that. It's the same thing. It's like the story that is there, that is present in Inside Man, and the story that is present in this movie is like pretty typical of the genre. So what you need is some like creative auteurist flourishes. Those two scenes that I just described, I want those played in like a one shot. I want the camera to follow a character up the stairs. I want just kind of anything, because the movie is lacking visual depth, and you know, there's only a few times where I was even thinking about the visuals. If this was an audiobook, I don't know if it would be any worse, you know, like it just needed a touch of artistry. And I'm not trying to say John Lee Hancock is not an artist. He of course is, but it just kind of, it just feels flat because there aren't those flourishes.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving right along, we'll talk about Denzel. Denzel Washington. He played Joe Deacon in it. I personally feel like Denzel can't ever really do a bad performance anymore. He's like at a place in his career where like he knows like how he sells himself. Like he knows how to act. Like he basically knows everything, and he's pretty like fantastic in this movie. Like he carries it like a good amount through, but similar to all the other things we've been talking about, I feel like his story just kind of lets him down, and we'll talk about it in the second section of the podcast. But we kind of want to switch things around, and I think like a younger Denzel would have played a really good different character in this. But as it is right now, he's solid in it. I love flashback sequences when they just color their hair differently. Yeah, I feel like it's a lost art form nowadays, and I mean, they did it in The Last Jedi, you know, and they didn't de-age. Like, it's just cool to see the actor acting a little younger. And Denzel, out of everyone here, definitely has the most depth. And he's not, like, miscast or anything. So you don't get those problems that we talked about with Rami Malek and Jared Leto. So overall, I think Denzel's definitely the best performance here, and, like, character just in general. But he definitely carries this movie with that Denzel-ness that he has and he's always had in his career.
Yeah, we have so much respect for all of these actors. We love Rami. We think Jared Leto has a lot of talent and has some really great roles coming forward in the future. But I mean, Denzel Washington is, for my money, one of the greatest actors who ever lived, because there's a couple of things that I was noticing that he does better than anyone in the world. I've talked about the actor's internal monologue a couple of times. And if you're an actor, this is like super obvious stuff. If you're into film, this is like super obvious stuff. But if you're not, if you're just sort of watching movies because you think that they're interesting and you want to kill 2 hours, I think it's worth just like talking about in layman's terms. When he's alone in his apartment or his motel room, he's looking up at the photographs and he starts to see the bodies and the victims that he's been, you know, trying to find the killer of. He's like playing with his lip in a weird way, and he's like looking down at one of them, and you can read so much into his eyes. The reason I wanted to just mention this is because that's not in a script. You aren't supposed to write that in a script. You can't say character thinks this. That's not okay in screenwriting, because now you're micromanaging. You have to leave that up to the actor. And Denzel is better at that than anyone in the world. Watch his death, again, spoiler alert, but watch his death scene in The Book of Eli, a movie that's not that good. But his death scene, watch his eyes, watch him internally realize that he's dying. It's heartbreaking. It's so good. He's doing stuff that isn't on the page. That's why he's one of the best actors that's ever lived. And then on top of that, he's the most charming actor, at least one of the most charming actors who's ever lived. And on top of that, like you said, he's always good. He's not ever bad. He's a pro. He's a total pro. So all of that he's taking into this movie. It seems like he took the movie pretty seriously, because it looked like he kind of gained a little bit of weight for the movie. He is like 60 plus years old. So if maybe he's just getting a little bit older, you know, but it looked like he makes a choice to kind of play the schlubbier guy than he normally does. He's always cool and confident, but in this movie, he was like cool and confident adjacent. Like he looked and sounded and acted like a guy who used to be cool and confident, but then had a heart attack and a mental breakdown, which is what the character is. So everything he's doing in this movie is good. He's not doing anything that's exceptional, unfortunately, because again, the character's kind of handicapped by the script. But Denzel Washington, every time he puts out a movie, it's just another opportunity to watch somebody who's better at what they do than you are at what you do. Like no matter who you are that I'm talking to right now, if you're the best baseball player in the world, if you're Mike Trout, Denzel's a better actor. Like he's better at acting than Mike Trout is at baseball. Denzel is better at acting than Aaron Donald is at football. Keep just going down the list. He's better at acting than Bob Ross is at painting. Keep going down the list. Like he's the greatest. I love him. I'm so happy he's in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, one scene that stuck out to me was when he was monologuing to the dead body.
Yeah, great.
And just imagine being that dead body. That's just, you're lying down there as an actor and you're like, oh, Denzel's just going to monologue to me and then I'm going to look at him at the end of the scene and that's it. But I got to like, just be like, even that tiny thing would be like incredible to be able to act with Denzel just for that amount of time. But yeah, that scene just stuck out to me because I was like, oh wait, like I've been thinking about it so much now. It's like, oh, everyone on set is an actor, and like this is all planned, and this person's getting paid to just lie there and listen to Denzel monologue to her.
Can we talk about that scene for a second?
Yeah,
I think that's one of the things. That's one of the seeds that's really good. That needed a little bit more watering, maybe a little bit too much sunlight. I don't know. It just, that's great stuff. I love seeing Denzel Washington talk to a dead body, knowing, and again, this is all in performance as well. Like the way he delivers it is, I know that you're a dead body and you can't talk to me, but I'm still going to talk to you. Because one, I'm trying to talk through my own thought process, but just by the grace of God, maybe I'm going to get you to turn and tell me what happened to you. He's like he knows that magic isn't real, but he's trying to do a rain dance to make the sky turn cloudy. It's like, it's great. That's a great thing. I wish that they hadn't gone as far as to have him envisioning dead bodies like throughout the movie and having her turn at the end. Cause I just like the coldness of that first scene where he's just talking to a dead body. And it's kind of crazy, but it's also kind of sweet because like he's really working hard to try to find who did this. It's just great Denzel stuff. Love it.
Yeah, definitely. And when he kind of takes the reins at the end of the movie, when Rami's character kills Leto and he calls Denzel, and it's a nice little. Again, we talked about how it's like, oh, they hate each other, but they're going to be friends at the end. It was kind of like a nice little bait and switch where it's like, yeah, they're friends, but it's because they've both done kind of the shittiest thing you can do as a cop, which is just kill someone who was innocent. And both of them have done that. And then now it's like, it's really like the older veteran, like guiding the person and guiding like the younger person and being like, you know, like you're just going to move on with your life. And that's that, you know? And obviously Rami Malek killed more of a piece of shit than Denzel did at the time. And I love the ambiguity with Rami's character at the end where it's like, you know, who knows what happens to him. But one thing's for certain is Denzel is okay with just like hiding this fact from the world and also just bearing it with him. You know, there's a nice little sequence where he takes out all of Jared Leto's stuff and then burns it all at his little thing, and then he just goes back to his normal day. And that's the last shot of the movie. And you know, afterwards I went, you know, fine. But in a more thematic sense, it's like super interesting, and like you definitely could like really look into that more. But overall, like the movie itself was like because I've seen 7 and you know, the end of Seven is just like it's like this movie's conceit is kind of like, you know, you like Seven, but like, what if we saw what happened after Brad Pitt does that thing at the end? It's like, I know that, like, the whole point was like it was leading to this breakdown, and you know, I guess this movie showed a little more, but I realized it's not as interesting as breaking someone, and that being the ultimate thing there.
A couple of things I just want to mention that I thought were really good about the movie, because I don't think the movie's good. I gave it a 2 out of 5 on Letterboxd. I think you did as well, but there's some good stuff. Like I said, I like a lot of the stuff that's happening in the last 45 minutes. I do like Rami and Jared Leto out in the desert digging ditches. Music is getting a little bit more intense. I didn't quite love the score throughout the movie, but I felt like this section, it was sort of working. I also really loved Michael Hyatt, who is an actress that I wasn't really familiar with, but she plays like the coroner character who works at the police station. And she and Denzel have this secret history that like we don't know everything about until the end. I thought she had so much charisma and she was so much fun and she lit up the screen and she has this beautiful smile, just so full of life. And I was like, something to grasp onto, something that's like fun and enjoyable. So I wanted to shout her out because I thought she was really good.
That was a great point. I forgot about her, but she does a really good job and also kind of humanizes Denzel in some ways.
Yeah, because that's what you also need in cold, bleak movies is you need good side characters to add some levity, not like jokey, haha characters, but just characters that are filled with warmth. Because ultimately movies about serial killers, movies about cops, it's always about like, is the world evil? Like, is God dead? Like that's usually like one of the central questions. And so you have to have some characters who have moral opposition to the main characters. And she was like so full of life and so vibrant, and Denzel was so broken and detached, and Rami is sort of breaking and detaching. So her presence was really fun in the movie.
It's the little things.
That's my last thing. Great title. And I've been quoting that all week long to my parents. Every time anything happens, I say, it's the little things, Mom. It's the little things that do this, that, or the other thing. Great title. Great line. Been quoting it. Good job.
I did like the color choice of green. I think that's kind of like a thing. I think it really meshed with like what they were going for in the story, and like this kind of like rotting underlying feeling that's going to come in, you know. And I thought green was a good choice there. And again, I feel like we talked about this in the Fargo series a bit. I feel like my TV like tends to just go more green than usual. So when a movie's green, I notice it more. But yeah, this was green, and I thought it was a little nice. But yeah, moving forward, let's move to the second section of our podcast. The first section was more or less criticism, but now we're kind of just gonna like kind of talk about like what could have made this better type thing, and like what we kind of like envision like going with the bones of this, because I think for us I think it's a good exercise, and I hope it's also interesting for you as well. So
yeah, I was saying this off mic, but I'll say it just because I think thought process is interesting. Maybe not to every listener, but to me it is. Last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever we released the lockdown pod, I didn't do a good job of explaining that film criticism is not just saying this movie would be better if it was a different movie. Like that's not film criticism. And I didn't intend what we were talking about in that podcast to sound. I wanted to distinguish those two things. I wanted to distinguish our criticisms from the things that we were kind of doing as like games. It's kind of just, you know, a fun little exercise for us, like you said. So that's why we split it up in this one. We briefly mentioned this earlier, but how good would this movie have been if, when it was written back in the 90s, if they made it, if Denzel was Rami Malek's character? How good would that be?
I think it would change the movie a lot, just because you got a charismatic lead, and then just to see Denzel go insane at the end would be, I mean, again, it's exactly Seven. It's what Brad Pitt was in the 90s. He was the coolest bitch in town. Yeah. And then it just him spiraling into nothingness, which again, I wholeheartedly recommend Seven. The killer in it is a problematic figure, but I definitely think it probably is a lot creepier now because he's not in the opening credits at all. I that's something I love about this movie. Like, if Jared Leto was kept secret about this movie, I think that would have added a lot to it too. And then we kind of talked about how like Rami Malek is kind of like a creepier kind of figure. So like maybe even like throw him in the Jared Leto role, and that could be a lot of fun. And then that would just leave Jared Leto to go into Denzel's original role, which again, this is all just, you know, our fun little exercise here. But like, you know, you make Jared Leto a little older to a younger Denzel.
And this part of the exercise only works in hypothetical land because we have to have 90s Denzel
and current Rami
and slightly older Jared Leto. But let me even further this exercise. Let's take this back to the 90s. I have a list of actors. I'm going to just run them off for various characters. You tell me yes or no. You could add a sentence here or two, but just shorter answers.
This is fun.
So and these are not necessarily the best choice, but just these are some of the hottest actors of the day. Okay, so for the Rami Malek character, Denzel.
Yes, 100%.
Perfect. Ethan Hawke.
Oh, interesting. I'm going to say no. I always see Ethan Hawke more grizzled, as it were. And maybe that's just because he's like the good Lord right now with the big ass beard. But even when he's younger, I feel like he reads more as a professor than a cop. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Highly recommend the Before trilogy, by the way, for anyone that's listening.
Yes.
Very beautiful, very romantic. Johnny Depp.
Yes, 100%. I am a Depp guy.
Depp heads. Robert Downey Jr. 90s RDJ.
90s Robert Downey Jr. Definitely the Leto character.
Okay.
No doubt in my mind, because he was high as a fucking kite in the 90s.
He was a little bit slimier, yeah. That
he was a little slimier. There's this movie that I saw when I was little. I forgot what it was, but he played like a crazy serial killer in a trench coat.
Chaplin?
It might have been Chaplin.
Christian Slater.
Ooh.
I think he works in two. I think he works as Rami and Jared Leto. Depends on the movie.
That's what I was gonna say. Either of those. Definitely not the older one.
Right. Will Smith.
Oh, 90s Will Smith, right?
Yep, 90s Will Smith.
Yeah, 100% the Rami character. No questions asked.
Okay, so for the Denzel character.
Okay, great.
This one was a little bit tougher because they have to be kind of older,
yeah.
You know,
this is a great game, by the way.
Thank you. I put in so much work here. Al Pacino for the Denzel character.
Yeah, you know, when you think about Al Pacino, you go, hoo-ha. It would be a great game show. I couldn't see him as like that. Like, I just couldn't see it. I don't know. I can absolutely see him as a crazy person, but he's a little more put together than I think Denzel was portraying in this film, and I don't think it would work 100% personally.
Jack Nicholson.
Oh, what? Yeah. Like, I think he's the perfect amount of crazy. Forget it. It's Jack Nicholson.
Clint Eastwood.
Clint Eastwood, huh?
And this is 90s Clint Eastwood. We think of Clint Eastwood sort of as young Clint Eastwood from the 60s and 70s, and then old Clint Eastwood from now.
Who talks to chairs.
Yes.
Clint Eastwood. Let me pull up a picture of Clint in the 90s.
What he has going for him is he's charismatic. You buy him as like a police officer, detective kind of character.
I would buy him though talking to a dead corpse.
Oh.
And I would certainly buy him being like, he like turns like a young Johnny Depp or something, you know, and he's like, we gotta cover this up.
We gotta bury the bodies.
Yeah. I could definitely buy him. And actually, can I go back to Al Pacino for a second?
Yeah.
Donnie Brasco is a pretty good movie. And in that, it's literally Johnny Depp and Al Pacino playing like a young and old gangster. So I'm going to change my answer to Al Pacino to yes.
Your point about talking to dead bodies also makes me love Jack Nicholson even more. Can you imagine Jack Nicholson doing his Jack Nicholson thing, talking to dead bodies? Like that's prime Nicholson that we need in our life.
And he has a little more hair in the 90s, and you get that classic Jack smile.
Yep. Last two, Anthony Hopkins.
I was thinking you were going to put him on there. I think he's one of the greatest actors of all time, and I think he can do anything. So yes.
Just watched Elephant Man for the first time. He's in that movie, and he's great. Really understated performance.
Wonderful actor. 45 years sober.
Great. Good to hear.
Yeah.
Last one. I like this one a lot. Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah. Of course. I mean, like, No Country for Old. It's basically his character in No Country for Old Men.
You might want to relocate it out of LA maybe because he's got that southern drawl. But
yeah, you're gonna probably move it to Texas for Tommy Lee Jones, but definitely good. Fucking no, Josh Brolin would be a little too young for that.
Oh yeah, no, he's super young at that point.
he is a young man. He's coming out of Goonies like 10 years prior. Cool.
For the serial killer, possibly character, the Jared Leto character. This one was also tough. You know, a couple of the names that I mentioned already could work in that category. Robert Downey Jr., Christian Slater.
Yeah.
Maybe even Ethan Hawke. This is tough because what Jared Leto's doing is very specific, and it's kind of hard to project some of these actors doing exactly what he's doing. But I want you to maybe drop that a little bit and just think, what is this actor's best version of a serial killer that fits into this movie?
Right.
Okay. Ray Fiennes.
100%. Yeah, he is. I mean, in the 90s too. Schindler's List. Shit. Yeah. These are great.
Ed Norton.
Oh, yeah, dude. Yeah, Edward Norton. Like, you're like saying these guys, and I'm envisioning. Like, also, first, both of them are in like black and white movies where they play like crazy ass people. But yeah, I mean, Edward Norton's also a crazy person in real life, similar to Leto. So I feel like that would work perfectly.
This one's an interesting one. I'm curious about this one. Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Ooh, 90s Philip Seymour Hoffman. He's pretty young.
He's pretty young.
It's
but there's no reason that the Jared Leto character can't be young.
No, and I think he actually would fit it better than Leto, because like when he had that pot belly, I was like, I don't buy that.
That's
Jared
funny,
Leto's
yeah.
like ripped, you know. But with Hoffman, I mean, it'd be a pretty big role for him at the time, I would say. Yeah. That like kind of like stretches his chops at that point, but I think, I mean, even if he plays it kind of like Boogie Nights, I think it would be really interesting.
It'd have to be late 90s. Like depending on some of these actors, the movie would have to be in production hell for a couple of years, or it'd have to get streamlined a little bit. But yeah, right. maybe and late 90s.
Also, overall, like, you want to make it before 7, though, is the thing. Because if 7 comes out, you're like, fuck, we can't make this anymore.
That's so true. Yeah. Tim Roth.
Okay. Tim Roth's interesting because in the 90s he's like pretty boy Tim Roth. I think Tim Roth certainly now could play, but like I feel like young pretty boy Tim Roth would fit more with like the Rami type character, you know what I mean? And again, I think that's just due to Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction and stuff like that. But he's always like playing the pretty boy. Like he wouldn't really grow out a beard. I feel like obviously like he would, because like if someone asked him to, he totally would. But yeah, I just can't see Tim Roth. Like I think he's a great actor, but 90s Tim Roth, nah, I'm gonna say no.
Okay. How about Billy Bob Thornton?
After Fargo season 1, I think he could do anything. But if you told me 15 years ago, I'd be like, Billy Bob, like, you mean Mr. Woodcock or whatever that movie's called? Like, I mean, obviously now, yeah, but like, and back then, yeah, because he's the same person, but like, I'm gonna shock you.
No, I'm
gonna say no. I don't buy young Billy Bob in it.
All
but
right.
Current Billy Bob can't do anything. He can do anything in my book, from Bad Santa to Goliath.
Last one. Willem Dafoe.
Hell yes. I also like, again, this is recency biasy, but like, fucking dude is so good in The Lighthouse. He should have won an Oscar for that movie. He's incredible He's crazy. He's great, but also like a cool person, I feel. And like, I definitely think he could add a lot of depth, especially in the 90s to this.
For sure. And there's a million other actors, but those are some of the notable ones. I'm glad that went well. Glad that went well.
Yeah. Super fucking fun to go through.
If this movie is made before 7, just as it is, it's, you know, it's still a 2 out of 5 kind of movie. Still kind of dull, not super visually interesting. Performances are fine. There's a little bit of a miscast with one of the main characters. But if it's made before 7, is it a better movie?
I'm going to say no is my first instinctual answer. And also, it wouldn't make 7 a worse movie. Actually, I'm thinking about it, because 7 would just be its own thing. And you'd be like, oh, it's like, I guess it's kind of similar if like someone was explaining it to me at a party. But
yeah, if you were drunk at a party in that universe, it would be like, oh, did you see like The Little Things? This movie's like that, but like so much better.
Exactly. And you know, there'd be the one guy, it's like, oh, Little Things was really good. It was great. You know, like 7 kind of stole from it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And to your last question of the night, Dan, what would we do to make it a little more interesting, spice it up a bit? What's one thing, you said it, wave your magic wand. I think for me personally, we kind of talked about it with 7, but I would add more of a through line with all the characters. And I know that's a lot of ads, but just like something to tie it all together and punch up that twist a little more, you know? Like maybe Jared Leto, I'm just like riffing right now, but like maybe Jared Leto connects with Rami Malek's daughters or something, and he's like always over at their house for some reason, and he's just like a local ice cream man. I'm really changing this whole thing, but like something like that, you know, to make it like be like, oh, like Rami doesn't he's not only scared that like he killed those girls and like he wants to get back to them, but he doesn't want that to happen to his girls also.
And also to that point, like when they're out in the desert together, he even like starts talking about, or maybe it's before they get to the desert, but at some point he starts talking about like, how are you going to keep these girls safe when you can't even keep your own daughter safe? And he starts listing off information that like, it's like, how does he know that? He's been stalking his family, and it kind of comes out of nowhere. But yeah, if you kind of plant that a little bit better, it's more scary. And especially if you're more invested in Rami's character and his family, like that becomes, because like it's the reason it's a trope, putting a wife and a child into a movie to make you care, is because how can you not? Like if their lives are in danger, like that's just human beings being human beings, you know, and being empathetic. Like, and it makes Rami's killing of Jared Leto also more like, well, you know, I kind of had no choice. Like this adorable little girl was in danger, and like whether he's the killer or not, like you can start to rationalize it a little bit more. Like, okay, maybe Rami didn't have any other choice. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that though.
Yeah. Any last magic wand thing for you, Dan?
For me, my magic wand solution is so complicated that I can't fault them for not doing it, because like this would be so hard, but there are some great movies that have done it. Change the narrative itself and make it a double narrative. I think we should be. So I recently watched, I feel so bad for saying this, but we're so deep into the podcast that, you know, I don't think too many folks are listening. I recently watched the Godfather movies for the first time. I went to film school. I know. I'm sorry. Just recently did it for the first time. They're so good, by the way. Why does nobody talk about these movies? But The Godfather 2 breaks the narrative up in two. It's like two narratives. And they're mirroring each other. It's a young Al Pacino after, you know, the death of his father in the first movie, you know, rising up the ranks and trying to get more and more power. And then it's also a young version of Marlon Brando, as played by Robert De Niro. And they're both kind of doing the same thing. You know, for many reasons, it makes the movie so rich and so lovely, and it makes the first one even more rich and lovely. I think that's what I think that would make this movie really interesting. If we are simultaneously following two cases that are mirroring each other and they both climax at the same time, obviously one is happening years earlier and the other one's happening years later. But if those are both building and building and building and both punches happen at the same time at the end, I think it's more emotionally powerful because they kind of do it a little bit. We finally see Denzel in his action of killing that young woman towards the end when Rami is killing Jared Leto. If you did that for the entire movie, I think it makes Denzel a lot better. I think it just makes the whole movie a lot better. But it's so tough to do that. To weave that together is so hard. But I do think that would be a really, really interesting movie.
Especially because I think that's a fantastic idea. But I also think it kind of it would change the current storyline because Denzel's the main character still in this movie. So like it would just have to be like he's a side character to Rami's main character in the current timeline, and then he's just like the lead of his own thing in the past one. I definitely think that would bring a lot more intrigue and make you think like, why are we seeing this old case and like how are these going to connect? And again, like you were saying, that punch would have been so powerful at the end if done right, of course.
Yeah, like, so tough. But
so tough. That's a great fix though, definitely. And I feel like both of our fixes are like they're one thing technically.
Yeah.
But you would definitely need a magic wand to add to it.
Totally changes the movie. But yeah, I think it. And again, it's easier to say this once because we've read a bunch of scripts of just like Friends movies that have not been made yet, and you'll read it and you'll be like, yeah, this is great. Yeah, and then you don't realize the flaws until it's already been shot. And so, doing this exercise is a lot easier since the movie's already out and we already have everything in front of us. And then we can say, well, why didn't you throw this in there? And they're like, okay, well, we could have used that during the script phase. But it's so hard to properly visualize all of it when you're just looking at it on the page. And so much of like developing and reading screenplay is like, and then, we'll do this. It's like, yeah, once we start shooting it, we'll do that. And this scene will be so good because we'll do this thing when we start shooting. It's like all sort of ethereal future stuff,
Yeah, and I think it's, and you're basically saying it, but like it's really fucking hard to make a movie, and so I never want any of our criticisms to be taken so wholeheartedly. I think these are just opinions and something we like to do because we love talking about movies. We love talking about cinema in general. And like hopefully one day we can put our money where our mouth is, but till then, I guess we're just going to be watching movies and talking about them.
That's right. We got a bunch more podcasts coming out soon. We'll probably try to do like a sports pod, a movie pod, a TV pod every month, Fargo pod. Just try to get that sort of general thing going for the foreseeable future.
Thanks for watching, and I'm sure we'll be watching a lot of HBO Max movies this year. And this has been a review of The Little Things from the Nothing Notable podcast. We'll see you around.